Hey, and we are live today with Steve Mintz, who's a market research analyst for Microsoft, right, Steve?
Absolutely. Yeah. Been there 4 years. Loving it.
So thanks for joining this morning. I guess it's morning your time, 8:45 or actually 9 a.m. Bright and early. You're out there on the West Coast, right?
Yeah, I am. Just outside of Redmond, where the main campus is in the city of Seattle proper.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the exciting part of Microsoft and your day at work, I just want to remind people that the reason we are doing this is because we want people to know more about the private sector, about careers and opportunities out there. And I can't recommend enough that you need mentors. And a great way to get mentors is to work with American Corporate Partners, acp-usa.org. I'm on the advisory council. Not just that, I'm also a mentor, the old hair club for men thing. I had a mentor. She was fantastic, and I recommend everybody get one. So thanks for bearing with me, Steve. I'm just a huge fan of ACP.
Absolutely.
And have you worked with them before yourself?
No, unfortunately, I haven't, but it's always been something that I'm interested in.
Yeah. So you're a veteran, right?
Absolutely.
So you could still sign up.
It's still time. All right.
If you have the time. So let's talk about this. So I'm excited. I haven't talked to anybody from Microsoft yet. So what was your path to Microsoft?
Yeah. So I think I think when a lot of people talk about large companies and especially tech, most people say my pathway there was non-traditional. And the pushback against that is always, but what is a traditional pathway? And I think I would open by saying there really isn't one traditional pathway. So for me to say traditional, non-traditional, I just think that that's unhelpful. So I'll push that to the side. And when I think about my team members, we have people who started when they were 20 and they're going on, if you can believe this, 30 years with the company. And then we have people who, in a very real way, it's their second career.
Right.
For me, I almost split the difference, I would say, in that commissioned out of West Point, did a very standard infantry schooling before going to Germany. Did not think that a career in the military was for me. So around 7 years, got out, transitioned into grad school. Again, the very traditional path, a soft landing at grad school.
I like that. Yeah. I did not think a career in the military was for me, so I only did 11 years.
No, did
4 years at West Point, 7 years.
7 years. But so that's the break point when really JMOs, commissioned officers, decide. And so went to grad school to figure it out. Still had some figuring out to do. Went into consulting, and then thought about it. Could I combine these worlds in a way? Is there a way that I could do research that drives decisions? And ultimately, one thing led to another, and I was hired by Microsoft almost exactly 4 years ago.
Okay, so let me go. What was your grad degree in?
Yeah, so international affairs. And a lot of people would view that perhaps too literally of you got a degree in international affairs focused on the former Soviet Union. What does one exactly do with that now? And I suppose what I would say to that is, it's not necessarily explicitly using all courses, all aspects of one's degree. It's about critical thinking. It's about writing clear communication, persuasive arguments, the ability to listen, which is in a very understated way, hugely important, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and all that is encapsulated in the degree. And it lends itself quite nicely to going into any analytical field, whether that's within public policy, international policy, or even in tech. And so I think one of the themes to talk about today is the portability of what you've learned in the military, what you've learned in grad school, what you've learned on the job, even outside of tech, suits you well for a career in tech.
I've got to say, I was not expecting international relations. But market research, understanding perspective,
Absolutely.
Having lived overseas, knowing that, if you want to communicate effectively, you have to understand what the other person sees and hears, and what influences their decisions. So I can see it now when you explained it, but when you said infantry officer, West Point, international relations, I'm like, that sounds pretty typical. And then you go Microsoft market research analyst. It didn't make sense until you explained it. So,
and I think that actually brings up a really good point when you talk about pathways. Is it's a story to be told. No hiring manager is going to say, "Oh, West Point, Germany, let's put him in market research." The onus is on the candidate to craft that story and make a very compelling case. Why? Let me tell you about how these parts actually fit together and position me well for the open role right here. So it is jarring. And I think that goes back to the traditional, non-traditional, whatever that means, pathway. It's really about making that persuasive argument. You may not have thought hiring manager, recruiter, HR, that this is what you're looking for, but allow me to make a persuasive argument why these stars line up. And I think we have a good fit here. And that's effectively what good candidates do. They don't just have a box of credentials. They have a coherent story that matches the opening.
So I guess my question is, I agree with you, because the traditional, I would say, is like, you've been a market research analyst for a company for several years. They look at your resume and they're like, he's got everything we need. Let's get him interviewed.
Yeah.
And the non-traditional way is everything except for that.
Yeah.
Right?
There are a number of people, and I think one of the great things about Microsoft is we have gotten away from the checklist, the USA jobs-esque checklist of must have these 30 things, and you have 29, but that's not good enough. We need all 30. Microsoft has a very high bar, and it's interested in your experiences, not necessarily where you got those experiences, but that you're experienced in it. So your experiences might, in my case, might have come from another market research company. They might not have. Right. It doesn't necessarily matter where you got that qualification. It's that you have it, and that you have this willingness to continuously learn. So instead of resting on credentials of trust me because I've done it at company X, it's a mindset that allows you to say, I've done a lot of things, I've made a coherent story, and I'm willing to put in the work to learn even more. And that can't be a statement. That needs to be manifest in your resume, in your work history of, I've adapted before, I've proven it's possible, and I'm willing and able to do that again. And that's actually one of the areas I think veterans excel at, is the throw them in an uncertain environment, and how do they do? Wouldn't it be nice if it were all comfortable and you're just doing the same job for 20 years? Veterans know that's just not the case. And Microsoft appreciates that they're going to throw a lot of things that are both comfortable and uncomfortable at you, and you're going to have to adapt.
So let's get into that a little bit, because you didn't leave grad school saying, I want to do market research. Obviously, you went to consult.
Yes. So
what did you consult on?
Yeah, so a lot of that this was in DC. So I went to grad school at the George Washington University Elliott School of International Affairs. And like many of my peers, I decided to work either in government, with government, or for government. And I decided ultimately with government as a defense consultant would make a lot of sense. And I did that for SAIC and Leidos and Booz Allen, and then a very boutique consultancy. Ultimately, it was something that the job was very fulfilling, but I found that after a few years, it had run its course. And there were a few things missing, and tech provided an opportunity for me to live those missing aspects.
Did the experiences gained in that consulting work lead you to market research? Or did you approach, I want to do market research for Microsoft, or did these experiences all come together to lead you down that opportunity?
I think, it's, I think I'll answer that fairly obliquely, if I may. I think sometimes among transitioning veterans, and I know I was guilty of this, there's too much pressure. And I know that sounds backwards, but to some degree, I think there's too much pressure that transitioning veterans, myself included, put on themselves, which is to say, I've got to get my next step 100% right. And I'm here to say, you're probably not going to get it 100% right. But what's important is that wherever you land, you learn, and you learn more about yourself and what you're interested in. And some of the things where you land might be a great fit and some might not. And then there's a decision to be made. So to answer your question, I was learning about what I really wanted to do, and some things were a good fit, some things weren't. And then over time, my thinking evolved in terms of, that's not what I want to do anymore. This aspect is missing. Where do I think I can get the best of all worlds? And ultimately, tech provided that answer for me.
Yeah, no, I like that. I really, as I look back at my own experience, I did a lot of work to get where I wanted in my first job, and it was great for about 8 months. And then I kind of outgrew the role. I learned so much, and it was such an incredible year that I spent there. But I realized it wasn't quite what I wanted to do, and I pivoted. And then I did a couple years at EY, and I learned even more, and then I pivoted again.
Yeah.
And I don't see many service members, veterans, whatever, getting out, finding a job, and staying there for 20 years.
I think so. And I think to some degree, it might be helpful to relieve oneself of that pressure of, I just did X number of years and I'm looking to do 20 and I better get it right because I only get one shot at this. And I understand the family pressure, and I understand the professional, and not to mention the financial pressure. And I get all that. But I would say you don't have to get it perfectly right. What you should aim for is put yourself in an environment where you're learning, where you're gaining skills, you're going in the right direction. And if you stay there, that's great. But if not, you're better for the experience. You're not taking a step down. You're not burning time. You're still moving in the right direction. And maybe it provides a springboard to something that's even better suited to where you are right now. I just have a hard time believing that your first step is going to be ultimately the step that takes you to the next 20 years. It might not be, and it might require some introspection to understand that.
I believe the average tenure for employees in the United States is somewhere around 3 years.
Yeah.
And so if you last 3 years, that's average. Like, that's great, good. Congratulations. So don't expect to spend that long time. So, okay. So Microsoft.
I do want to build on that for 1 second. And one of the great things about tech is the fluidity of it. There are reorganizations, there are lateral opportunities. The job you entered to do is not necessarily what you'll be doing in 2 to 3 years, whether by your choice or through a reorganization. So it's a great way, once you join the company, they hire you. They don't hire you for a particular role. So they invest in you. And in that investment, they will say, we hired you to do X, but there's now an opportunity in Y, and we think you're the best person for it. You do have that lateral, if not escalating opportunities within the company. And that's one of the things I like about the scale of Microsoft is, should you choose to stay there, you could do any variety of jobs still under the same roof.
Yep.
And a very, very appealing thing, especially as you're accumulating domain knowledge about how we do business and the business we're in.
And you cost way more to a company like Microsoft than just your salary. I think people don't realize that, with stock options, all the great benefits and everything else like that. I mean, they invest in you and they want you to stay in their larger ecosystem. So
absolutely.
So let's talk about, did you just apply online blindly?
I didn't do everything right in my transition, nor in my career. And I think there needs to be some clear-eyedness and some level-headedness. Candidates should look for every advantage that they can get. And those advantages take the form of mentorship and referrals, other things that, and quite frankly, the investment of going online and researching companies, those provide huge advantages to you. And not everybody does that. I went in with a very low probability approach, which is no referral, no tech background. I'm going to apply online and we'll see what happens. Although that happened to have worked for me, I wouldn't advise it for others. And here's why. You're really starting at a low chance of success. And anything you can do to boost that chance, whether get people on the inside of the company to help you navigate, have a mentor, research the company in depth, study them for a while. Any step you can take to better advantage your candidacy, you take. Now, the interesting thing, and I need to mention this, the interesting thing about Microsoft is it differs significantly from a lot of companies, especially East Coast companies, where maybe jobs aren't posted that long or at all. Maybe handing someone your resume is really the way we're hired. Microsoft and most of tech has gotten away from that. So there are no side doors, there are no windows that you can crawl through. It's really, there is a front door and you need to apply because that is the most transparent and fair way to do it. And yet, give yourself advantages, know people on the inside who can help you navigate the company, who can help you understand job descriptions, a mentor, and then that research is really the way to manage yourself.
I'm sure you still have referral bonuses, right?
We do. A lot of those, though, are you have to show a long relationship with the candidate. And so this is not the cash cow of making 100 referrals and hopefully one.
No, and I'm not saying that, but if somebody puts in an employee, Microsoft employee puts in a referral for a company like Microsoft, it at least gets flagged in some way, shape, or form for somebody to look at it.
It does, and it's a great way of taking, and I think we just need to be clear-eyed about the numbers because especially in a work from home environment, and perhaps we'll talk about that in a little bit later, competition is fierce, and a referral is helpful and should be pursued, and yet ultimately it is the strength of the candidate. And you are competing against many people with a variety of skills, and it comes back to what I said earlier about making that impressive, coherent story about, let me tell you why what I've done translates well into what you need.
But let me just add something here, because I want to make sure people don't take this sideways. West Point grad, GW grad degree, 4 years of experience, or a few years of experience working at Leidos and Booz Consulting. You were not a typical candidate. So like there is a pedigree there. Those are known names. Those are strong degreed institutes. So like it's not, and you weren't applying to be a director.
I think there's two things I would mention on that. One of the things that I would, and it's a great point, so I'm glad you brought them up. One of the things I would mention is working at scale. And what Leidos and SAIC, Booz Allen, and really I need to hit this home, the military have in common is the scale. These aren't 30-person organizations where you can swivel around in your chair and on a first name basis with everybody. It doesn't work like that. And so one of the very appealing aspects when we're looking at candidates is, has this person operated at scale? Which is not to say we don't give the time of day to people who have worked in startups. Certainly that's not what I'm saying. But in terms of, do they understand navigating large companies? Can they do that? It's heartening when they see, yes, because the military is massive. SAIC, Leidos, Booz Allen is massive. It's not just a 30-person shop where the system is whatever the person invents that day. And that's important. The second thing that I would mention, and you asked about what level I came in as, it is often, I need to be careful about this because I know this pops a few balloons. Our chief marketing officer, Chris Capicella, advises people in their careers to only make one move, which is to say, if you're going to move, stick with the function, change the geography. Or if you're going to stick with the geography and the function, you can change the level. And if you're going to move industries, make sure everything. Well, he's done quite well for himself. So I think there might be something there.
Where is that post? By the way, you have to write that down and please put it in the post.
I will quote him and tag him, and we'll see if he follows.
And let me know.
But I think that's wise advice. So when I moved, going into a managerial role would represent an additional step. And I understand this deflates a lot of expectations, responsible for the welfare of 30 soldiers and $200 million. I understand all that. But I would also say maybe entering as a individual contributor, which we call a IC, might be the right step. Learn the environment before you lead in the environment. And sometimes we get, and it's true, we get not just veterans, but sometimes veterans, quite huffy arguments about, do you know what I've done in the past? And it goes back to what our CMO, Chris Capicella, said, which is really focus on that one move. If you're changing industries and trying to lead and trying to change geographies, it's too much to absorb. It's too much newness, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work out well for you. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out well for your team either. And I think a candidate should understand it's not just about them, it's about the team. And to what degree are they not going to be the leader they want to be because of this volume of newness that they'd be absorbing?
I am completely entranced. My brain's on overdrive right now with this one move concept. So we're going to have to set another time to chat about that. Because people want to know, what the heck is a market research analyst?
Yeah. So fundamentally, I think in this conversation, I think the easiest way to translate that is you can think of us as a two shop, an intelligence shop. And instead of maneuver saying, what is the enemy disposition? It's really about what is our competitive environment. So clearly there's analogy there. And it's about making business decisions. How should we package and price this? What is our relative position to this customer? What do we think are going to be the leading trends? And will those provide headwinds or tailwinds? And when you're talking about a company of Microsoft scale, you can't just pull up a report, say it's going up, and think that's good enough. I usually tell people we care about decimal places, which is to say it's not enough to say it's going up. It's really down to the decimal place, because those decimal places can turn into tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, the difference between them. And our general manager, not yesterday, just sent out an email how research drove what will likely be $100 million decision. So fundamentally, it's research that drives business decisions, and then with a massive monetary component to that. And big implications. So getting it right matters, but learning from mistakes also is important as well.
So how do you get assigned your research projects? I'm assuming you're not just working on one thing all the time.
No, Mike, if only it were that easy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So generally we have, and this is fairly analogous with how some other organizations work. You have people who specialize in methodologies, and then you have people who specialize in certain domains, in certain apps or services or products. And then there's an interplay between them. This person might know the product, this researcher might know the product very well, but it calls upon this research methodology. So we form these matrix teams around business questions, very analogous to what you do in management consulting. You form the team that you need, but also fairly analogous to joint task force as well. We need this component, this component, this component. We put it together. Someone's in charge, and that's rotating. So the notion of you're a individual contributor, yes, but you're leading this project. And then we go forth over the course of weeks, but more generally months, we'll say 3 to 4 months, to look at all aspects of the business question and close the gaps. You mentioned one project at a time. The workload varies. Right now, I have about 10 in in various states. Various states could be a cold email that says, I'm interested in knowing more about this, to a very developed, we're about to deliver the final report to corporate vice presidents.
Yeah.
And at any given time, you'll probably have a stable of 10 projects, and they'll be in these various states. Some, euphemistically, I'll say, terminate early. And some take on a life of their own, and they spawn more and more work.
Right.
And it's really great to see how analysis can lead to deeper analysis and deeper understanding.
So you are an internal consultant.
To some degree, it's internal. To some degree, it's internal consultant, but it's really not just making the organization stronger. I think sometimes when people say internal consultant, they think about management consulting and personnel. It's about products, it's about apps and services, and our place in the market, and that's where the market research.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, you have a very particular skill set, or a very particular set of skills, as Liam Neeson says in Taken or whatever. But it's the same thing that Brian Arrington kind of does from a different perspective at Wells Fargo. You know, they have, as a business initiatives consultant, he comes in and supports this. So what I'm kind of understanding is that, you know, they have decisions that need to be made, and there's a team that's going to do all the coordination, all the research, and provide the information that's going to enable a decision maker to decide which way to shift the business or whatever. And you're a critical part of that team doing the market research. So if they have a decision and they say, we need research done or whatever, it might be, hey, let's grab Steve. And you start supporting all these different decisions as a member of a larger team.
Absolutely. And it's also, there is that responsive aspect, but there's also the proactive aspect. And I think service members are fairly good about this. And in Jim Mattis's book, he wrote about, regardless of what your job is to provide options. I absolutely love that approach, which is to say, if you know a decision needs to be made, you don't need to be told that research needs to be done or options need to be formulated. You can get out ahead of that. And so quite a few times, you can preempt the question being asked and said, as I see things coming together, your choices, and I'm heavily simplifying this, are between A and B. We've already looked at that. Let's engage in the conversation to understand the differences. So I would not want to be part of an organization that is simply responsive. Let us know what you're thinking, and we'll tell you what we're thinking. Getting ahead of the problems is a good share of how we spend our days.
I love this because I totally see how everything came together from your consulting experience. You know, in any of the larger firms, if you just sit there and do your job 40 hours a week, you're going to eventually just phase out. You have to be networking and finding opportunities to engage with different leaders, different projects, different programs to show your value beyond that one job. And it sounds like, you know, you've been on this path that you may not have seen 4.5, 5, 6 years ago, but this path has given you everything you need from grad school through consulting, you know, learning how to do all of this stuff into Microsoft to become this market research analyst. And so I'm really excited. I mean, it's such an incredible path. I guess
one thing I build on, though, is that, and I think this is, I want to bring up this point because I do feel it's a fairly large distinction between the military and tech. And I think you just provided a fairly good segue there. And that is tech expects, I think it is an explicit expectation, continuous learning. Whereas the military believes that the schoolhouse is an interruption to actual doing. Tech sees this as concurrent. So even though we've talked a lot for the last half hour about path and what got you here, it is I can't frame it any better than saying it's a continual fight for relevance. That means you have to invest in yourself, your own education, to continually learn where is the market going, building up your domain knowledge, And I think those transitioning from the military have to embrace that continuous learning, perpetual learning mindset, and not just thinking, I'm doing a job, it's all about delivery. It has to be about delivery, certainly, but it's also about learning and getting better and mastering the craft. And I think that's a little bit of a departure from certainly the Army schoolhouse approach.
Yeah.
And it might require, for me at least, it required some unlearning of those practices and relearning. But it's a very good thing. And your fight for relevance only helps you in the end. Putting the time in, investing in your career, investing in your network, knowing what's going on adjacent, peripheral to you are great steps to take. And they do not stop on your first day. In fact, they just get started on your first day and they never end.
So that's incredible. So we're already over 30 minutes. We never actually got into your day. So can you give us just a general rundown of what a day looks like for you? You know, start time, end time, in between, in generalities.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, Microsoft has moved to almost exclusively work from home. Mm-hmm. And we've also announced a few months ago that employees soon will have the option to not return to the office when offices reopen.
Right.
That is a heavy simplification of a massive policy. Yeah. So with that, there's a great deal of openness to when your day starts and stops. And I think one of the things that really appeals about the company is that it is, as we used to say, it's big kids rules. Mm-hmm. You have a job to do. You only have a certain number of hours during the day. No one is going to manage how much time you spend on what, but it needs to be done. So my days actually have started without a commute. My days tend to start fairly early. Mm-hmm. And then
fairly early.
Fairly early can be sometimes days start around 7:30. Now in military speak, maybe that's not fairly early, but in the corporate world, 7:30 is a good jump on things. We are a global. My team is global in that we operate across time zones. So my 7:30 is not everybody else's 7:30 a.m. And you have to really understand that and appreciate where team members' days ends. Yep. And that's only going to be accentuated as work from home becomes a more permanent fixture. And then to simplify this, what I would say is it's really about developing the business questions, taking them from a very loose concept of we need to know more about X all the way to delivery of what might be a 1-hour report that takes a 360-degree view of the business question and says, let me tell you about the explicit and implicit aspects of this. Let me tell you about how this affects Microsoft. What are the knock-on effects? What are the risks? How do we mitigate those risks? And ultimately, it drives to a business decision. It is not information. It is not journalism. It is not information for the sake of information. Ultimately, it comes down to, Steve, should we do this or not? And the cleaner and clearer you are about that, the better a report. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it is burdened by a tremendous amount of risk, which is to say there is uncertainty. Right. And you should frame it as such. And so it's taking something from that nebulous state, turning it into something a lot more concrete, which allows decision makers in a confident way to act upon recommendations.
That makes sense. So 7:30 to 3:30, is that about?
Probably a little later than that. Probably a little later than that. I would say, and I think it's an important part, is you are your own regulation. No one is going to stop you from working an 18-hour day. And it's incumbent upon the employee, given this tremendous amount of...
I thought you'd appreciate that.
Yes, I did. It's incumbent upon the employee, and there are some, in terms of design thinking and MDMP. Yes, there's having a structure is important, but there's a tremendous amount of accountability and empowerment put upon the employee. If you want to work 20-hour days, you can. But most people understand it's about optimizing. If this took me a week today, how can I get it down next quarter to just taking a day? How can I be mindful of my own time? And I think in a work from home environment, we have to be especially conscious, and managers have to be especially conscious. Are people self-regulating in an effective manner, or are they not? So I will tell you, Mike, my days do go a little beyond 3:30. I think I need to admit that. But I am not the person who is working through dinner into family time every day. They never see me. That's not healthy. Nor is it being a good employee, because it's not pushing back when demands are just too great to be done.
Yep. So we're getting close to 40 minutes, and that is my official cap. So I want to get into a couple of questions I think the crowd might be interested in. One, if somebody wants to do what you do,
yeah,
what should they be focused on?
I think that's it's a great question, and I'd really almost, and I know this is unfair, but I'd turn it back on them about what about the job appeals, and fundamentally it's about solving business questions. So there has to be a curiosity, there has to be a grit and a persistence, and that can be born from many different places, and I think my career bears that out. So it's not just was an Intel analyst. Certainly that would be easy. A collection management officer, yes, that would make for an easy transition. But it's finding within yourself why you have a passion for this. And then it is, if you haven't already, building that commensurate skill set, having the critical skills that you need. A lot of that has to do with oral and written communication, understanding domains, understanding technology. What I'm not going to say, and I get this question all the time, is do I need to code? The overwhelming majority of people at Microsoft do. We are an engineering-led organization. We build, but not everybody does. And so what I would say is you have got to formulate within yourself a deep appreciation for the technology, understand what it does, understand what it unlocks. And if that's not what you have a passion for, you're probably going to struggle. You're probably going to struggle in this environment. If it's just, I like to sell, but I don't care what I sell, you're not going to have a passion. It's going to be transparent, and it's not going to work out for anybody.
I love how you phrase that. So don't try to work in tech if you don't love tech.
Yeah.
That simplifies it, but I mean, and you got to be able to tell that story on why tech is important to you. And I think you hit the nail on the head with, lifelong learning.
Yep.
You can't just wake up one day and say, I want to work in tech and I love tech. And then I'm like, okay, well, what have you been doing?
Yeah.
Well, I do my thing.
Yeah.
No, that's not that compelling story that you've talked about.
It is. And it goes back to the compelling story. It goes back into technology unlocks this value. It allows us to do this. And an investment here has massive payoff. And that payoff can be, let's be honest, material, but it could be so much more than that. It could be the investment of environment and green technology, environmental technology. And if that's what the passion area is, Microsoft and the rest of tech may be a good home for you. So I would almost put it back on the candidate, the transitioning service member, and say, what are your passions? Understand that. Understanding your skill set, and if you can write that coherent story, and I do mean write it, actually write it down. Don't just think you know it. Know it well enough to write it down and share it. If you can make a compelling argument, you might be surprised at how well that opens doors.
Okay, so we're getting really close.
Okay,
we're not going to make it below 40, but that's okay. One, if anybody watching this wants to chat with you, can they reach out via LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. You can find me at Veterati as well. I'm probably going to open up some slots. I'm happy, what I decided a long time ago when I was looking for an opportunity is people can generally be bifurcated in two categories. And I know this is a very coarse cut, but there are people who will make time and there's people who won't. And I said when I was looking for a job, let me become the person who makes time. And I want to live up to that. And that goes back to, I want to share the story. That goes back to when I worked at Department of State, and Ambassador Steve Mann, ambassador level, he has made it and then some. Foreign Service officer who was then stationed back in DC, quite literally had a clipboard on his door for Friday afternoon signups mentorship. And it was first come, first serve, to his door, sign up. And I just thought that was a great way of engaging. Now, obviously, we'll do something a little more high tech than that. But for him to make the time is a trait that I really wanted to replicate. And now that I'm in some position to do so, I will. And the reverse is true. Just like him understanding what junior Foreign Service officers were thinking about, were worried about, this allows me to keep a pulse on transitioning service members, allows me to message, allows me to be there for them instead of just unilateral communication. Here's what worked for me so many years ago.
I love it. So last question, number one tip to a transitioning service member to help them find their next career.
I think it's going to be advice that other people may have given, and it starts with that deep introspection about what you really want to do. This is not a let me try to sneak this in between Netflix shows. Let me knock this out on a Tuesday night. That introspection, it's hard to do when you're in uniform, because for the simple matter that you wake up and you know what you have to do every morning. But out of uniform, there comes a freedom with that. And that freedom can be a little bit off-putting, can be a little bit scary. And you have to work through that, understand what drives you, understand what your passions are. And I'm here to say it's okay if what you want to do after you separate is a lot different than what you did in uniform. And I think some people seek, and it's fine, but some people seek comfort. I used to do that. I know I can do it. I would ask you to think about challenging yourself, which is to say, I've never done this before, but I think I can write a coherent story, and then start crafting it, understand where your gaps are, and invest in yourself if that's what you want to do, and if that's what you can do regarding, I think I can write a mostly coherent story. There are gaps here, there, and there. What can I do to then fill in those gaps, and is that investment worth it? But ultimately, not doing that introspective step is going to be the difference between a good chance of success and a good chance of not.
Yep, I think that's fantastic advice. I couldn't agree more. And I also think that's where finding mentors really comes in, because if we don't know what the other side does, or what they value, or what they expect, we can't know what those accurately figure out what those gaps are.
It's true, and I have to say, without naming the organization, I hoped to work at an organization I wanted to until I got there, and I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do, and that's fine. It's a process of elimination. It's a painful process of elimination, but really understand what drives you, but also be prepared for a wake up that says what you thought it was, it's not. That's going to be a much harder conversation to have with yourself if you don't even know what you're looking for in the first place.
Yep, that's fantastic. Well, Steve, this is our longest one to date, 44 minutes and 18 seconds.
Right.
So, but I wouldn't change that for the world. So thank you so much for spending almost an hour of your time today, actually an hour with talking in advance of your time today, giving back. And I really appreciate your support of our community.
Absolutely. And no need for the conversation to end here. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do my best to pay attention to that channel, obviously balancing that. And then Veterati, I imagine I'll open up a few slots over the next 2 weeks or so.
And I would encourage people to take advantage of that. So thanks again, Steve, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you.